Hi, everyone. This is Gary Berman, host of the Cyber and AI Heroes Adventure Show. I want to begin by thanking our sponsor of today's show, Reliant AI. In my almost 10 years of doing these shows and my entry into the cybersecurity and AI ecosystem, this is the very first company I've ever endorsed. And it's because their mission is to add a layer of truth to business AI. Now, this is a complicated and rapidly changing environment. I also want to thank the Put Data First conference that's going to be happening in Las Vegas on October 27th through the 29th at the Planet Hollywood Hotel. You'll have an opportunity to interact with high-level thought leaders, such as our guest today, Dr. Gil Baram. Hi, Gil. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Gary. Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. And one of the things that I've already come to learn about Gil is she's incredibly humble, as most of my guests are. But I don't suffer from that. People know me about that. And so Gil, I'd like to hear a little bit about your origin story. I want our audience, though, to know that you are a PhD. That you did some amazing postdoctorate fellow work under a Fulbright scholarship in Israel, and that's not something most of us get to say that we've done. We're going to be getting to in a few minutes this amazing stuff you're doing UC Berkeley in collaboration with Fortinet. And so why don't we just jump right in and tell us a little bit about what you think the state of affairs are regarding national security and the use of AI and cybersecurity is a subset of that. I mean, how do you unpack that question?
Yeah, so first of all, thank you so much, Gary, for having me here. I think that, you're on a mission, and you're doing amazing things, amazing work in advancing your mission and the awareness to cybersecurity threats, for all levels. And I think you're doing such an amazing work, and I really
Thank you so
appreciate
much.
it.
Thank you.
So thank you so much for having me. It's really great honor to be here. Um, yeah, so I think it's a huge question, and I can start by sharing some of the things that I've been seeing in the past couple of years. So for my PhD, so much time ago, I've been following state actors, and how they're operating in cyberspace, or how they're developing and using their cyber capabilities, and how they're conducting their offensive cyber operations. And we can remind ourselves, over a decade ago, when then Secretary of Defense Panetta warned again from Cyber Pearl Harbor, coming, and that the next war will be a cyber one. And more than a decade has passed, and wars are still being fought, not only in using cyber and of course AI, but we've I think we realized throughout the years that cyber capabilities are a part of ongoing conflicts. And we've seen that, in the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine, we've seen that cyber capabilities are being used by both sides, but alongside other kinetic capabilities, and
Yes.
not instead of other capabilities. And we see, in I think the past 2 years, we start seeing how state actors are learning how to use AI, for their offensive cyber operations and for their information operations. And every couple of months, we're seeing reports coming out of Google, describing how states like Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran are using Gemini, and recently there was a report by OpenAI, I think earlier this month, describing some operations by North Korea, Russia, and China. So we've seen, and I think I can share the bottom line and stop there for this question, but we're seeing more of the same, but in scale. We're seeing, or let's say we didn't see yet, or OpenAI and Google, didn't see yet new techniques that we never imagined, and that's we sometimes we hear in the news, like how AI will take control of everything, and these big titles that try to scare us. So we don't see that yet. We don't see fully autonomous attacks, but they will get there, right? And we see that the scale of the attacks is getting much, much bigger. And for example, let's take phishing emails, spear phishing
Oh,
attacks.
yeah.
Yeah, we're all familiar with them. We are, experiencing that on a daily basis. So now, let's say attackers coming from China or from Iran, they have a perfect English now because they use their favorite AI model, and it fixes their English, right? Or we used to say that it's easier to identify emails, because you see the translation, right? You see words that don't match, but now they do because it's and it's very, very simple, but it makes the phishing emails become much more precise, much more attractive, and that's just a very simple example.
Well, to build on that point, just recently there was a notification of the very first ever AI generated attack from start to finish. And it attacked, I think it might have been some industrial control systems, and just completely by AI. And also recently, there was a company, I won't mention their name here, but a company that basically has cornered the bug bounty market because they've developed this system using AI, LLMs, et cetera, to be able to find bugs before anyone else. I mean, wow.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, I can share some one insight that comes in mind now, that the project that you mentioned that I'm doing with UC Berkeley and Fortinet will run a series of 3 tabletop exercises, one in the US, one in Singapore, and one will be in Tel Aviv. And we take experts, from the industry and from the government, and we try to simulate, how they will use AI as attackers and as defenders, in different levels. And I think one of the interesting thing that we see is that, let's say, the first tabletop exercise took place 10 months ago in the US, and things, or let's say scenarios that we thought will take, about 2 to 3 years or 4 years to get to, are happening now, just as you mentioned. And we talked about different stages of the attack kill chain, and where attackers will use AI and where will it be easier for attackers to use AI. And we thought it will take more time. And now we see, that some attack vectors are just becoming completely autonomous by using AI, and it's happening much faster than we could expect.
Well, that's a good segue into, I think this would have been a blog post from days to minutes, what AI exploit automation means for the cyber offense defense balance. Can you tell our
Mhm.
audience about the genesis of that work?
Um, yeah, so I think what made me think about it is an example as you mentioned, of one company and or a couple of companies um that were able um to create this type of autonomous attacks or to identify bugs, in much more, autonomous way. And that made me think about, the well-known, offense defense balance that usually we think about when a new technology is, starting to be used and advanced, and it's always the question, who will win? And there is no good answer for that. But we want to say, yeah, we hope that defenders will always be able to defend, but as the defenders get better, the attackers will get better, right? And if um, when you work manually, you find certain amount of bugs in certain amount of time. When you use AI, you find more bugs in less time, right? So as you mentioned with the bug bounty and how AI models are winning these competitions, so it's a balance that will never be balanced, right? It's always one side will have the upper hand, but it's very, very dynamic. And I think the interesting thing with AI is that it's making everything move faster, faster and faster, and in scale, right?
Well,
So
those are
yeah, that's
those are
what we're.
two. Forgive the interruption. Those are two very
Yeah,
important
sure.
dimensions. Speed, but then also scale. Usually, it's one or
Yeah,
the other, or there's some kind of trade-off. But in this instance, it's apparently it's both. And there was just an announcement, a CISA announcement, 2 days ago, I think it was, that China, most likely China, was in everything in terms of DoD. We already
yeah.
knew they were in critical infrastructure, but now it seems, almost everything. What do you do about that?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And just a couple of weeks ago there was a big publication about, the Salt Typhoon, the
Right.
Chinese campaign that
Mhm.
was Salt Typhoon, and before that the Vol Typhoon that was targeting all the US telecommunication companies, and many other countries, found the Chinese in their critical infrastructure, in their communication networks. Um, and I think once you realize that you've been attacked, and as a country you've been attacked, that's there's you can fix, the your defense, but the question is, how do you defend against the next attack, and how will you recognize that you've been attacked, right? And I think one of the interesting things that I read recently in the OpenAI report is that, state actors are using AI also for deception, to stay
Yes.
still,
Yeah.
and continue their operations, and be able to stay in the network
Oh, yeah.
as
Yeah. I
much as
mean,
possible.
there
Yeah.
was a good friend of mine, retired Rear Admiral Mark Montgomery, was very involved with the Cyber Solarium Commission
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
other things like that. He works for the Foundation for the Defense of the Democracy at the
Hmm.
moment, and he's, in my view, a preeminent military analyst on cybersecurity for sure,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
also on kinetic sorts of things. And basically,
Hmm.
I don't think he coined the phrase, but cybersecurity is the fifth domain of warfare. And also that China is staged in our critical infrastructure, not
Yeah, like
at the moment.
prepositioning. Yeah.
Exactly, not for espionage, although I'm sure they do. They steal intellectual property for sure, but that's not what they're doing now. And this is in the event, God forbid, some type of kinetic war, most likely
Hmm.
in the South China Sea or Taiwan, in
Yeah.
the Philippines, and things are getting tense there from a military standpoint. What's your assessment of that?
So I think you raise an excellent point here because, sometimes when we talk about cyber and AI, and sometimes we tend to be very focused, on the technology and what can we do with the technology. But what we need to remember always is that this is a part, of a broader um, geopolitical circumstances or
That's right.
geopolitical tension,
Right.
and that's what affects, how states are operating and how our nation states are operating, and that's how they decide or why they decide to use this cyber capability or the other, right? But we have to remember that these type of tensions are tensions or conflicts or wars, are always there, and everything that we see as this example, is of the Chinese is a part of a much broader conflict,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Also,
Yeah.
just to build on that point, fairly recently, four-star General Hawk, who ran the NSA, the National
Hmm.
Cyber um, Defense, was fired from
Yeah.
his position, and by everyone in the industry, that's a huge loss. What without getting too much into the politics of things. Um, I just wonder if this is sort of comparable in some ways to the nuclear sort of proliferation that happened, years ago, and sort of mutually assured destruction, so no one will use it. Is it safe to assume that we are probably in all of our adversaries, technology in the same way they're in ours?
Hmm. Yeah, I think I wish, we could say yes, and but there are, I think in this I won't say cyber domain, but it's not. I don't like to use it because it's not a separate domain, right? It's
Integrated. Yeah.
a part of everything, but
Mhm.
it's harder to trace and it's harder to know what is going on. Like you can have the best defenses, but and that gets us back to the offense defense balance. But maybe your adversary has slightly better capabilities or capabilities that you didn't think they will use, and then they're in your networks and you don't know about it. Right. And the US has this defending forward approach, which is, I'm a big fan of, and I think it describes pretty well, how the US and I hope other countries as well should or are operating in, other countries' networks. And I think what you describe is we can think about that. Like if we assume that the adversary is in our networks and we know that we are in their networks, then, maybe that will keep a type of kind of balance. But, as geopolitics is not so stable, the democratic peace and all these theories, we see that things are changing very fast, and it will have an effect. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And one of the comparisons that cybersecurity and then AI are always made is to the human brain. And so we have this kind of reptilian brain, which is fight or flight.
Yeah. Or
Yep.
freeze, right? Freeze,
Yeah,
fight, fight.
or
Yeah.
fawn, you freeze, fight or flight.
Yeah.
And I'm going to relate this to a question, believe it or not. The second part is like the limbic system, which converts this information into feelings or the beginnings of thoughts. And then you have the prefrontal cortex that, is the executive function that's designed to make rational decisions. I'm going to ask you about a couple of countries and which of the three levels do you think they operate on? So let's start with China. Are they just fight or flight or fawning, or are they high level executive function and strategy, or somewhere in the middle?
So the way I see it, they are really high level,
Mm.
really high level, and we've seen this type of I could say evolution, I think, in the way that they are conducting their offensive cyber operations, right? Like, I can remember that a couple of years ago, we would say that the Chinese, they're like modus operandi is that they're trying to attack as many targets as possible. They don't try to keep, stealth. They don't mind to go public, and that they don't mind to get caught because they have many, many resources. And as long as they, several attempts are successful, right? That's good. It's like spraying, the attacks. And and today in the couple of recent years, we've seen that their operations are much more precise, are much more targeted. As we mentioned, especially against the US, but not only. And we see really a shift, right? And they're not stopping, right? And everything is very planned. And I think if I'm trying to think about, Russia or North Korea or Iran. I think everything there is very, very planned. And I think, North Korea is another interesting example of how a nation state can use, cyber operations and now adding to that, AI capabilities to gain money, right? It's something that we usually think about, cyber
Yeah, like
criminals.
billions of dollars, apparently.
Yeah, yeah, and just one anecdote is that I think it was in the last year or a bit more, we started seeing, criminal groups learning how to become cyber criminals, because AI, and LLMs are making it easier to do, as we mentioned, these phishing attacks and very low level, but it's enough to gain money, right?
Well,
So,
and very low risk, and they have very low risk
yes,
compared to shipping drugs, um,
exactly,
especially
exactly.
off of Venezuela at the moment. But that's a different
Yeah.
topic. But,
Yeah, yeah. So just going back to North Korea. So, we're seeing a country that using its offensive cyber operations to gain money in cryptocurrency or it's cyber attacks against banks, and it's been going on for a couple of years. And now we're seeing them, using AI to create deep fake, right? And fake personas, fake voices, and the North Korean IT workers. It's a thing that we've been hearing about in for the past year, I think,
yeah,
even
on
more than a
LinkedIn,
year.
they're getting jobs on LinkedIn.
Yeah. And they're doing that very well, They study and they know how to interview and or how to be interviewed. And so that's something, that without these abilities to fake in a very, realistic level, they couldn't have done that.
So where would you say Iran is now, given the wars and nuclear facilities and stuff like that? I mean, are they? I'll say it a different way. How rational do you think they are at the moment?
So I'm not an Iran expert, but my understanding, from watching them, in the past couple of years and how they developed their cyber capabilities, I think they're very rational, in terms of force development and use of force, and including learning new capabilities, and there's the open reports like for OpenAI and other companies describe how Iranian actors are trying to use even different models, different LLMs, some to create the attacks and some to execute them, or some, so there is, they're not staying behind, right, in that as well.
Hmm. That's interesting. So going back to something you mentioned earlier about, for example, AI warfare, and let's say Ukraine and Russia. Ukraine, out of necessity and genius, I would say, has been able to innovate drone warfare unlike anywhere else. What's your assessment of that?
Um, so, I think that um, I think once we see that, we saw that in the battlefield, right? Not just in an experiment, but we start seeing that in the battlefield. I don't think we'll be able to go back, right? I think these types of technologies and this type of developments will just continue and get better, and hopefully, all the conflicts will turn, will stop, and we won't see that. But, given everything that's going on, I think once a technology has been used and once we've seen how it can be used, it's very hard to go back and say, oh no, we don't want to use it.
Yeah, so much so. I was listening to a speech by, I think it was the president of the European Union, and she was talking about how Russia is penetrating different areas like Poland and Estonia,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
and that the way they were able to defend the drones, but the economics of it are completely lopsided because they have a drone that might cost, $10,000 or something like that, and they have to scramble, three jets in order to take down that. And so what
yeah,
she was
yeah.
advocating for is a complete buffer of drones, of anti-drone activity along the entire eastern border, and I think also
Mm-hmm.
along the southern border as well. What do you think of that?
Well, I think I completely understand, the rationale, right? Because and I think if we think a bit about this, and like the bigger picture, we can see how these types of technologies are creating this asymmetry, right? How in I would say cheap or not too expensive capabilities, the Russian gets, three, as you said, as three jets up in the air, and I think if we think about, cyber capabilities, and as we mentioned just earlier, about AI and cybercrime, and we see how this technology gives actors that don't have much resources or don't have the technological knowledge, which is not the case with Russia, but it just to talk about this asymmetry, and how it provides other actors, with capabilities that were much harder to have before.
Indeed. Well, Dr. Baram, I could listen and learn from you all day.
It's very mutual, Gary, very, very mutual. I enjoy our conversations very much.
and how does our audience get in contact with you?
Um, Many ways. I think I'm on LinkedIn. I have the email, on my website, and everyone is very welcome to reach out and continue the conversation.
And your website URL?
Yes, it's just gilbaram.com.
Oh, okay. That's good.
Yeah.
Well, Dr. Brahm, on behalf of a grateful digital universe, thanks so much for who you are and for what you do. And if I might add, why you do it.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And to our
Thank you.
audience, you're welcome. And to our audience, stay tuned for more of the Cyber Hero Adventures Show.